Hello, and welcome to Game Gems. Today, we're going to briefly talk about a very useful topic, that of bindable callbacks. Like nearly everything else in GDScript, functions are objects. Specifically, they're objects of the callable type, which means that we can define them as variables and, more importantly, pass them around like variables. That includes passing them to functions. Why would we want to do this? Among other reasons, we can implement the programming pattern known as the callback pattern. Stop me if you've heard this before. You have a dialog box that prompts the user for a yes or no response to some question, and based on that response, you want to execute a particular bit of code. Maybe you want to save a file, exit to desktop, or disconnect from a server, whatever. This is easy enough to implement. Simply attach a signal to your button that calls a method, and away you go. But what if you later want to prompt the user for a yes or no response to a different question, and execute a different bit of code? Your first impulse might be to create a new dialog box, but as I said in my video on texture caching, don't repeat yourself unnecessarily. I mean, how many dialog boxes are you planning on creating before you start asking yourself if there's a better way to do it? What we ultimately want is a reusable dialog box that can execute any code we give it as the result of a user's response. That executable code is known as a callback, and in Godot, callbacks are functions, which means they're callables. Let's give it a go. Here you can see that I've created a simple dialog box that asks the user a question and prompts them with a pair of buttons indicating potential responses. The No button is simply going to hide the dialog, but the Yes button is going to invoke a callback. I've wired up both buttons to their default signal handlers, as you can see here. The first thing I do is, as previously mentioned, handle the No button by simply hiding the dialog. This means we don't want to take whatever action the dialog is asking us to do, so no further handling is necessary. The next thing I do is define a callback variable. This is simply a variable of type callable, and since GDScript is a flexibly untyped language, you don't even need to define it as a callable, but you should. Defining variable types is a good habit to get into, and in a lot of cases it actually makes your code run faster, and we all want that. After the callback is defined, we need to write a function to take the relevant data and show the dialog. I've defined one here called prompt. Prompt takes both the prompt text and the callback method as parameters. In this method, we set the text of the dialog's label and assign the callback to the callback variable. Next, we handle the callback in the Yes button's handler. Again, we'll hide the dialog, but this time if the callback variable is not null, it should never be, but safety first, we call its call method. This invokes the function same as if we'd typed it into the editor. That's great and all, but how do we use it in game? Well, all we need to do now is simply call the prompt method of the dialog and pass it the text and a callback. How do we define the callback, though? We can do it in one of two ways. The first is to define a function within the invoking class, same as you would any other time, and pass the name of the function, without parentheses, in as a parameter. If this looks familiar, it's because this is how you connect signals. Passing in your signal handler is the equivalent of offering it up as a callback to Godot's internal workings. The second way is to use what's called a lambda function. Lambda functions don't have a name. You define them directly within the parameter list and pass them along. The syntax is very similar to defining a regular function, so you're not really learning anything new here. Lambda functions can get unreadable real fast though, so we tend to save them for times when a method either isn't going to be used anywhere but the callback definition, or the content of the function is so small, think 1 or 2 lines, that it's easier to just define it in line. And there you have it. There's just one more thing we need to talk about, and that is bindable arguments. You may have noticed that our callback definition doesn't take any arguments, nor does it invoke with any. This is an inherent limitation of the pattern, because any function you want to use as a callback must have the same arguments as the callback definition. There is a way around this though. Using the bind method, you can, bind additional arguments to the method you want to call. Godot does an attempt to match these bound arguments to the function signature. They're completely separate. So all you have to do is define them in the parameter list of your callback and make sure to bind them as you pass the callback into your method, and you're good to go. And that's it. The callback pattern is incredibly useful, especially when you're doing a lot of heavy UI work. I personally use it all the time for building scroll containers linked to player inventories or the aforementioned prompt dialogues. Maybe if there's enough interest, I'll do a video about the former use case in the future. Anyway, don't forget to like, subscribe, or go support my Patreon if the mood strikes you to keep the game gems coming. See you next time!